I'm beginning to believe that what we speak into reality becomes true, no matter what it is. Maybe not no matter what it is, but it sure seems the power of the word is how we were created in God's image. And that when we speak negatively to ourselves, and when we speak negatively towards others, or towards reality, then the self and other and reality become negative. Speak positively, affirm, speak with love, speak with prayerful connection to God, and you will receive positivity, love, reflections of God. Now I am being punished by the judgment of the words which I've spoken for so long from a place of pain. See, years ago, in 2018, I had a traumatic experience where I essentially went to war with some interdimensional parasitic beings. And for so long, without the proper tools and wherewithal to understand what happened, to feel my way through what happened, to release what happened and relinquish it and heal it and bring it to completion. As a young buck, fresh out of college with a philosophy degree, obsessed with overthinking, and at that time, over drinking as well, the poisonous elements of the overthinking mind, the texts which I had affinities with, were existential. One of the quotes is from Notes from the Underground. The opening passage is, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I believe my liver is diseased. Well, let it get worse." This is the kind of text that I read in college, and I was like salivating at how magnificent a piece of shadowy literature it was. And it still is. And I still have affinities with that author, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who happens to be born on November 11th, 18 something, and I'm 11/22, November 22nd. So we're both Scorpio Sagittarius. So philosophers of the depths of the shadow, we have this obsession with understanding the roots of evil and of all of the ways in which we negate our own freedom, in which humanity negates our own freedom. Now, even slightly resurrecting these affinities with these intellectualities has gotten me all in my mind, and I've got to ground myself in my body again. So I was fresh out of college, just had this traumatic experience with demons, and for years since then, I was not necessarily in search of healing the snake bite, but understanding why the snake bit me, which is quite a silly thing to do. And the mind's ability to understand and to tell stories in order to understand is infinite and perpetual, and will create with its word any kind of story just to make it make sense. And if word and breath, and if our beliefs, and if the stories that we tell, and if the speech which we speak into being becomes true and becomes reality, well then all of the stories that I told myself about what happened on that dreadful evening and the dreadful evenings to follow, well, they have come true. They have materialized. And much of the storytelling that has happened since then was this idea that the world is perpetually conspiring against me. That the world is constituted by unsafe forces that are trying to entrap me, that are trying to imprison me, that are trying to deceive me, that are trying to keep me in perpetual prisons of deceit. That every single thing that I perceive is a lie. The ocean, the mountains, love, the cities, friendship, anything is something that is potentially deceitful, against which I must protect myself. This is the story that I have been telling myself with my wounded mind, seeking to understand its pain for years and years and years. And for years and years and years, these stories have woven themselves into the wounds of my body and into the reality generation field of my heart, my wounded heart. Such that the wounds woven into the reality generation have created for me the truthful apparition of a reality that confirms the biases which I have woven in search of understanding. Does that mean that my stories are true? In a way, yes. They are relatively true. They are truths insofar as I have breathed the soulful truth of my being into them. But in terms of absolutes, their truths are not absolute. The only absolute truth is God, and God is not a deceiver. God is not deception, and God is in fact incompatible with deception. Though that is a intellectual knot, because if God is incompatible with deception, then why does deception exist at all? Why does God allow deception to exist if God is everything? The problem of evil. And then my mind will get lost. And paralysis ensues. Now, speaking of that, as I said, I'm house sitting. And I'm dog sitting. And in this house, there is a text, a book in the book collection by this author, Fyodor Dostoevsky. The first book I mentioned, I am a sick man, I am a spiteful man, I believe my liver is diseased. That is Notes from the Underground. He has another book, which he wrote later in his life, called The Brothers Karamazov. And I flipped to a random page in that book, and it happens to be the very chapter called The Grand Inquisitor, which is one of the most famous chapters from that book. So synchronistically, God guided me to that chapter. And the chapter of that book is about the Spanish Inquisition, when the Roman Catholics and the Catholic Church was essentially slaughtering anyone who was going against their teachings and their dogma. And they were allowing people to buy their way into heaven. You could pay the Catholic Church for a little coin that says, you get into heaven now. And the Grand Inquisitor, this chapter, is about Christ actually coming back into our reality and visiting this imperial church and visiting one of the high priests of this church who are preaching the word of Christ and using the word of Christ to sell indulgences and to sell entrances to heaven. And the priest, as people are like celebrating the miracles that this Christ resurrection has performed, the priest walks in and is like, whoa, 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 what's going on here? And all the people kneel and they're like, oh my God, we must kneel to this priest, to this king. And we must obey him. And he's like, what is going on here? Is this guy trying to say he's Christ performing miracles? Put him in jail. And so he literally, this priest of the Roman Catholic Church, imprisons Christ himself. Hopefully, I'm not spoiling the chapter for anyone, but it could never be spoiled because it's such a magnificent piece of literature that you could read it knowing what it's about and still get something out of it. And then the priest gets into this discourse with Christ himself, whom the priest has imprisoned, and they get into this debate about this certain passage in the Bible about Christ in the desert facing the temptations of the devil. And they get into this dialogue as to like the problem of evil. And why didn't God solve evil? Why didn't Christ, who is right here, reincarnated, resurrected, before the priest, why didn't he abolish evil? Why did he allow evil to exist? And all of these ways in which he could have resolved the problem of evil. All to say, that rambling. Is that this question of the problem of evil. Why did I bring up that passage? Right. I brought up this passage because, as I said, I've been speaking into reality for a very long time, for years of my life, since my traumatic experiences, this idea that there is only deceit, that is the only thing that is controlling my reality. And simultaneously, I have been telling myself, faithfully believing, that God is universally good. So I've been holding this absolute paradox. One coming from my wounds, and one coming from my innate soulful knowing, which I've just known this from direct mystical experiences that I've had of the divine, but also just from the innate wisdom of my soul. I know that God exists. I know that He is there. And I know that all of this, the beauty of the world, the beauty of this vast ocean, the beauty of the earth, the beauty of the mountains and of nature, the beauty of the stars, the beauty of flowers in bloom, all of this beauty, which is infinite and immeasurable, all proves the necessary existence of a beautiful creator. This is just, it's not even a question. And yet there is deceit. And so I brought up this passage and this book because it literally speaks directly to my soul and directly to the very discourses that I've been telling myself and wrestling with in my mind and in my wounded reality generation field, and it has presented itself in my reality. In this exact moment of my life, when I'm living with this emotionally codependent dog, and I'm witnessing the energetics of this dog as the microcosmic rippling chains into the macrocosm of the possibility of the rat race existing. I'm witnessing how this dog and the way that this dog is enmeshed with its owner in a way that is emotionally mutually extractive, because these beings have lost their connection to their own hearts. That disconnection from the heart, disconnection from God, which God exists within our hearts, sustains our hearts with breath. That when beings sever themselves, sever their connection to the sacred that dwells within their hearts, then they are left to reach and grasp externally and do whatever it takes to extract emotional safety from another. And whatever it takes very quickly becomes a rat race of a rat devouring another rat if it needs to, of a rat stealing from another rat if it needs to, of a human deceiving and stealing from another human if it needs to feel emotionally safe, to fulfill the meeting of its needs and its wants and its animalistic impulses and its avoidance patterns that will make comfort feel like safety in the avoidance of wounds and pain. All of these things. I know it sounds like I'm maybe rambling. I hope it makes sense. But it feels very helpful for me to process this aloud and to speak about it in such a way that I understand it. And I understand the fact that for 7 years of my life, I have been living internally in the internal monologues of incomplete truths, wounded truths, wounded explanations and stories to tell me why the quote-unquote snake bit me, instead of healing the fact that a snake bit me, instead of healing the wound, instead of using words to pray healing into my body, into my reality, witnessing how internally I've been doing this and how my reality itself has, through my power of speech and logos and breath and word, has been mirroring this reality back to me. This reality of things are always conspiring against me. Beings are always out to get me. Beings are always out to deceive me. And I am at this junction where I see the mirror of this being presented to me. And I see the falsity and I see the truth. And I, with discernment, slice these things in half, and I split the false away from the true, and I get rid of the stories that are false, and I approach once more the resurrection of absolute truth, and I allow myself, and I guide myself, and I receive the guidance from God, and I receive the inspiration and the invitation to tell a new story. To tell a story that God is always conspiring in my favor. That God is always using all things in the universe for the sake of my soul's evolution. And for the sake of my soul returning to God. For the sake of the healing of all of the ways in which I've been deceived into severing myself from God. God is conspiring for closeness with God. And it's not even a conspiracy. It is just a doing. It is a blessing. And similarly, to speak love into existence, to speak affirmation into existence, to speak instead of, hey, dog, don't do this. Speak, hey, can you do this? And then reward and give love. If I'm going to relate it to this emotionally codependent dog, who I'm using as a teacher right now, and I'm having a hard time. I pray that the energetics of this rambling and this exploration and these musings have been pure and soft and truthful. They've felt a little chaotic, to be quite frank. And so may I reclaim some of that chaos and offer it to the ocean. And then offer you some of the ocean's energy, which itself is a form of chaos, the chaos of the pure womb, the womb of creation. A chaos which is not negative. A chaos which is the great mystery from which life is birthed. So, it seems to me that I am being invited to speak a new reality into being. And to speak a reality that calls in purity, that calls in freedom, that calls in truth, that calls in divinity, that calls in abundance, that calls in ease, that calls in grace, that calls in healing in a world that so desperately needs all of these things, because there seems to be a ubiquity of deceit and falsity and illusion layered over our reality, so that the reality that I speak into being, the lightning strikes which I throw from the sky, from a bright blue sky into reality, is the slow and fast and instantaneous lifting of illusion. Remove illusion, dissolve illusion, and allow truth to bloom in the form of a flower. And perhaps even in a grand act of divine transmutation, the flowers can feed upon the illusion to transmute it, rearrange the particulate matter of reality, not to make illusion true, but to dissolve the illusion until only truth remains. Only the truth of God, only the truth of love, only the truth of freedom, only the truth of breath, only the truth of all that is truly, absolutely true, and not just a half-truth, rooted in wounds, rooted in samsaric misunderstanding. Let true, absolute truth resound and dissolve all half-truths, all illusions, all appearances. And let the truth of nature engulf the world. And let the truth of our soul, of our souls, the truths of our souls shine and resound and amplify and reclaim freedom in this realm. So, if what you want is some clarity as to why I wove a thread of speaking reality into being, realizing that I've been speaking reality from a wounded place and thus witnessing a wounded world, and then going from that into perceiving this text written by this insane, mad genius of a Russian man in the 1800s, Dostoevsky, who actually also was sent to the gulags, spent years in Serbian prison camps. So witnessed the depth of the darkness and the deceit and the cruelty that humanity is capable of. And still chose in one of his texts to write the words, "Beauty will save the world." I spoke of beauty earlier. I spoke of beauty being proof, irrefutable proof of the existence of God, such that the statement that beauty will save the world is the statement that God will save the world. And we speak this reality into being. And I carry the breaths of one of my teachers, Dostoevsky, one of my greatest influences, literary. And I allow myself to recognize the divine perfection in every chapter of my life, writing itself through God's will and through my own will, and through the ways that are mysterious like the ocean womb that weave God's will into my will, and that walk that subtle thread that weaves fate and free will together, that weaves destiny and free will together, and allows their seeming oxymoronic existence to coexist and to converge into the co-creation of reality, always divine, always towards the highest fruition of all souls and all beings. And I choose to recognize this, and I choose to then speak it and affirm it into being, that it may become my reality, that it may become the microcosmic healing of my heart and of my soul and of those wounded places where earlier I began this video speaking of traumatic confrontations with interdimensional parasites, such that I speak here the healing microcosmic of any ripples of that trauma within my microcosm, that my reality generation field may now speak healing into being and speak from that healed place as opposed to speak from that wounded place. And so too might I even speak a prayer of healing for those beings. Because imagine, but not too much, because you don't want to cast this upon yourself, but what would it be like to be severed from the divine? All of these parasitic forces, all of these deceitful beings, all of these quote-unquote powers and principalities, they are severed from the divine, and that is the greatest pain in the world. So let us pray that this pain can be healed for them, so that they too can return to God and be healed by His eternal and graceful love. And this is a process of forgiveness, because there was malefic intent in the experiences that I had 7 years ago. And here I speak forgiveness. I speak forgiveness, and I feel forgiveness. And as I say this, my arm is beginning to lose strength. And the arm is holding up my phone, so I just switch arms to the left-handed arm, the feminine arm. Because it's hard. It's hard to forgive the beings who have committed the most atrocious acts of evil, not only upon you, upon me, but upon the very foundation of human being. It is woven into our genetics. It is fallenness. It is sin. It is corruption. It is decay. And somehow we have to find it in our hearts to forgive. And forgiveness seems to come from the heart, and forgiveness, above all, comes from God. So, that's what wanted to come through. Apparently, this situation that I'm finding myself in with this dog, this emotionally codependent dog, is very deep medicine, making me confront really deep parts of myself and release old stories and write new stories of love, forgiveness, truth, divinity, and freedom, and soulful reclamation. So, I'm going to leave it at that. And I'll end it with a little prayer that any hints of distortion, because I felt sometimes my mind, especially when I was talking about that text, an imbalance between heart and mind, where I was a little too in my mind. And so let all that belongs to me belong to me alone. And let all that belongs to you belong to you alone. And let all that belongs to the earth be returned to the earth. And let all that belongs to God be returned to God. And let all that belongs to deceit be absolutely dissolved by truth. Let no deceit exist any longer. And let truth resound like a liberating drum, heartbeat by heartbeat. That's it. Thank you. Love you. And may reality become an infinite blessing.